saints of the Most High, Rod Thomas here, welcoming you to a new installment of the Messianic Torah Observer. I'm so glad you took the time out of your busy schedules to fellowship with me here today. And as always, it is our hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. Well, today is sort of a special installment of the Messianic Torah Observer. As you know, we are in the midst of the Passover season. Excuse me, got a little tongue-tied there. And I thought it would be opportunistic, let's just say, to share with you a message that I gave over this past weekend, this past Shabbat, with a congregation on the East Coast that I live streamed into. And it was an overview of the Passover story, the very first Passover story in Egypt. And it was basically an overview of the Passover story from Exodus 1 through Exodus 12. And then in the midst of the overview, I gave a lot of content that I pray will benefit you in your walk with Messiah and spiritually as we prepare to receive Passover, the entire 8-day observance of Passover, starting with Passover on the 14th day of this month, not the 14th of April, mind you, but the 14th of this first month, the month of the Aviv, and then the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread, which goes on from the 15th day through the 22nd day. So I shared this message, this overview with this group, and I said, I think it could really benefit most of the listeners, you guys here of the Messianic Torah Observer, especially those who are brand new to faith, to kind of give you an overview of the importance of what happened during that Passover. So I have that for you, but before we jump on over into that, a couple housekeeping items for you. We have our website in which this podcast is hosted, along with a lot of other content that you may find useful in your walk, at the MessianicTorahObserver.org. Again, the MessianicTorahObserver.org. On that website, you'll find the social media platforms in which we use for various reasons and for various platforms in which to get information out, as well as a number of means to contact us. Our email address is perceptionwp@gmail.com, as well as there are a number of contact forums or platforms you can use on the website if you're so inclined to contact us. There's also the platforms in which you can support us. We thank you for those of you who have supported this ministry. We are so grateful. And we pray that you will be richly blessed as you have richly blessed us. So we're going to keep on putting out content that we trust will bless you in your walk. PayPal and Patreon are the two mediums in which you can support us. All of this is found on the website, the MessianicTorahObserver.org. The last thing I want to tell you on housekeeping, you see, I'm doing better. I'm condensing these housekeeping things, so it should make some of you happy. And the message today is going to be roughly about an hour. So we're going to be right around an hour, so it won't be one of the long, drawn-out ones that I've done in the past. But anyway, back to what I was saying. One of the last things I want to say in housekeeping is that we have launched QFC Live. If you've been with us for the last several weeks and had listened to our post, you may remember that I had put out that we were going to begin a live streaming arm of this ministry. The Messianic Torah Observer, It's Not As You Perceive, are the podcast arms of QFC. which is our ministry, our overall ministry, QFC. So we have now added a third arm, which is essentially QFC Live. Now, what is QFC Live? QFC Live, friends, is a weekly Sabbath and feast day teaching series, a service. It's not so much a service as much as it's a teaching platform where we get together and we fellowship online. It's not as it's mainly us teaching and praying, discussing the things that are important to our faith in about an hour 15-minute format every Sabbath. Now we're starting off every Friday evening at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's, again, let me tell you, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Friday evening. And on every feast day, we will be live streaming a teaching. So as it stands now, as I am recording this, we will be live streaming a teaching and a gathering. We're having a holy convocation, if you will. We're actually going to be going through the Passover meal that Yeshua instituted. Some people call it the Last Supper. Some people may call it whatever you want to call it. Let's just say a lot of people call it the Last Supper. But we're going to just say we're going to observe the meal that Yeshua had with his disciples, in addition to adding in all the elements and the teachings around that. So we invite you to be, and that's going to be on Tuesday evening, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, that's going to be this coming Tuesday evening. And that is going to fall actually April 7th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We would highly encourage you to join us if you're able to. We would love to have you. We're going to be on 3 social platforms: YouTube, It's Not As You Perceived YouTube channel, and 2 Facebook I don't know what you call them, accounts or pages, 2 Facebook pages, if you will. One is It's Not As You Perceive's Facebook page, and one is the Messianic Torah Observer's Facebook page. We're going to be live streaming this gathering on those days. So we would invite you, as well as your family members and all, to get together and let's observe the Passover that our Master observed the night before he was crucified. We're going to go through the story, and then we're going to actually have our foot washing ceremony, as well as the bread and the wine. So we're hoping that you will make that a part of your weekly, this QFC Live will become a part of your weekly Sabbath regimen, as well as your feast day observances. Because again, we brought this into existence, if you will, because a lot of us are kind of isolated from other like-minded believers in Messiah, so we don't really have a place to convocate. Many of us don't have a congregation or a fellowship in which to congregate, so we are kind of filling the gap there, that which is missing. Now, it's even more fortuitous during this time when most of us are at home anyway. We are in this kind of lockdown situation. So this will also be very fortuitous. It will serve the purpose of bringing a convocation into your homes. So we hope that you take advantage of it. And if by chance you can't make the 7:30 p.m. PST time live streaming, rest assured it will be posted for perpetuity's sake on the YouTube channel, and you can go back the next day or whenever it works for you to tap in and see what you may have missed live streaming. This is a work in progress. It's brand new for us. And we are going to keep tweaking it. And for now, we're going to, go with what we have right now. So we're hoping to see you there. And with that, we're going to bring the housekeeping to a close. And we're going to transition over into the teaching I gave this past Sabbath, the overview of the first Passover, the Passover story. I'll see you on the other side. May you be blessed, fellow saints in training. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And thank you, Pastor Hall, for this wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to always share the word of our Father Yahweh. A couple things before I get started. If you hear me slip up and say Yehovah instead of Yahweh, please don't be offended. Please don't be offended, because that's what I proclaim his name to be and have been. But I definitely respect anybody who uses the name or Yahweh. It's fine, because we're all on the same journey. And you know what? In the end, we're all going to get it right one day. So the second thing just wanted to say is I love this fellowship. I love this gathering. It's a fantastic thing. And I say blessings to all of you. So Pastor Hall asked me to kind of go over briefly this whole Passover story. And I'm not going to be telling you guys anything earth-shattering or anything new that you don't already know. Because if you've been in this faith for any number of months or years, you already know the Passover story. But there are a couple things that I just want to go over in terms of laying or setting the table, as it were, regarding the Passover. The one thing that we have to always keep in mind when we're talking about observing, remembering, or keeping the Passover is found in Romans chapter 10, verse 4. Now, I'm not going to burden you with finding that, but Romans chapter 10, verse 4, Paul wrote to the Roman assembly of Messianic believers. He said, "For Messiah is," and I'm using the Hebrew Roots Bible translation. I was able to download it on my phone. Paul writes, "For the Messiah is the goal of the Torah for righteousness to everyone that believes." Any of us who tries to keep Passover, or who goes through the actions of keeping Passover without the end game, without the end goal in mind, that Messiah, Yeshua Messiah, is the end goal, you're just going through the motions of keeping Passover. Our master, our older brother, our soon-coming King, Yeshua, is where it all points. And that's where we must keep that in mind, because that's the big deal. And I'm certain that Pastor Ray is going to be talking about it in his portion. So I want to jump right into it. There's a lot to unpack as it relates to Passover. There's just so much stuff involved. So I'm just going to lay out an overview of what Passover is all about. And you really can't get too much into Passover unless you go back and look at how this all began. And I'm just going to go through an outline. Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1 outlines that 70 blood relatives of Jacob enter into the land of Egypt. 70 blood relatives. There were a lot more because they had servants and they had associates and everything, but 70 blood relatives of the patriarchs, they call them, enter into Egypt. Over time, the Israelites grow in number, but then a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph enslaves the Hebrews because Joseph and the patriarchs ultimately die. And so we have here the Israelites growing in number. They're enslaved by Pharaoh, this Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, and Joseph became the second most powerful person in all of Egypt because of Father working through him. And yet he died when the Israelites or the Hebrews came in and set up shop with the 70 or so, they were treated just like royalty. But after a while, when Joseph died and his 11 brothers ultimately passed away, another Pharaoh comes into power, doesn't know him, doesn't know Joseph, doesn't remember that the Hebrews who came in were of royal status as well. So Pharaoh gets scared of the numbers and he ends up enslaving the Hebrews and puts them through hard labor, which we've known as bondage, puts them into bondage, Egyptian bondage. And then in fear, Pharaoh goes in to stem the growth, because even though he enslaves the Hebrews continue to grow in number. The harder he enslaves them, the more they procreate, the more babies they have. They just keep having babies. So Pharaoh goes about, of course, killing off the male children by throwing them into the Nile River. So there's some great spiritual significance in that act that Pharaoh thought was going to stem the growth of the Hebrews. Because of the plague of blood that we'll see in the 10 plagues, the first one where the Nile turns into blood, this kind of ties into that. The Hebrew baby males are thrown into the Nile, and ultimately, Father's going to hit the Nile River with blood. We'll see that in just a few minutes. And we also see a foreshadowing in the Pharaoh's order to throw the male children into the Nile with the murder of the male children in Israel, in Jerusalem, by Herod when Yeshua was born. So we see some foreshadowing of that as well. This is just so rich in all kinds of truths that we see. Exodus chapter 2. We have the birth of Moses in the midst of this male slaughtering of the Hebrews. He is born, and then Pharaoh's daughter adopts him as her son. Let me just say this also to the side. Most of what we were first in I may be dating myself, but Pastor Hall, he and I are about a year or so apart. We got a lot of our knowledge of this whole Passover, the Passover story, from the movie that Charlton Heston was in. What was that called? I can't remember. Do you all remember that? The big movie. 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments. They used to play that every Easter back in the day, and that was a big movie. So, but a lot of people, that movie put out that Moses never knew that he was a Hebrew. It was all this big secret that Moses' adopted mother had. But it's not true. Moses knew from the beginning that he was a Hebrew. And most likely all of the Egyptian court knew that he was a Hebrew, because Moses was adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. And then Moses ascends and becomes a part of the royal family and the royal Egyptian court. But all along, we know that Moses knew that he was a Hebrew, as well as most everybody else knew. And that's in Exodus chapter 2, verses 13 and 14, if you want to check that out. But ultimately, Moses slays an Egyptian who he catches beating a Hebrew unjustly. And word gets out that Moses had murdered the Egyptian, and Pharaoh issues a death warrant against Moses. So Moses, hearing this, he flees out to the desert and ultimately makes his home in the land of Midian. He marries a young lady by the name of Zipporah, and they end up having a son by the name of Gershom. But in the midst of all of this, Father hears, Yahweh hears the cries of his enslaved Hebrews and remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is a pivotal situation we have here, because now we're getting into the concept of covenant, agreement. Father remembered his covenant with the patriarchs, with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. He remembered the agreement he made with them. He remembered the agreement he made with Abraham that he would make him into a great nation, his descendants, and that he would give them a promised land. Covenant is vitally important to Father. Covenant. It's something that we'll get into a little bit later when we're talking about the smearing of the blood on the doorpost and the lintels. There is a situation called a blood covenant that we'll see displayed in the Passover story. So thank you for reading that. Then we get into Exodus 3. Quite simply, while tending Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, flocks around Mount Sinai, Moses has a face-to-face encounter with Yahweh. And Yahweh, in that face-to-face encounter, commissions Moses to lead the Hebrews out of bondage and explains how it all is going to work out, noting that Pharaoh is going to be a tough nut to crack. But the people of Egypt were also going to have a close encounter with the creator of the universe, and that will ultimately lead to the Hebrews' release. And this in verse 20 through 22. Then we get into Exodus 4. And Moses is, we see here during this close encounter between Moses and Yahweh, we see the person of Moses. We see that Moses is a defeated and a deflated man. Even despite being in Midian for so many years, you got to remember that Moses had reached the pinnacle of notoriety and authority and privilege when he was in the court of Egypt. And during that period of time, he had everything he wanted, everything he could ever have. And then he gets into trouble and has to flee to Midian. And of course, he is a defeated person. He has lost all of the things he used to know back in the day. Now he's just a simple shepherd, tending his stepfather's sheep, not even his. It's his, not his stepfather, but his father-in-law's sheep, not even his. It's his father-in-law's sheep. And so he's like a defeated person. And so Father is giving him this plan. You're going to lead these people out of Egyptian bondage. And the first thing Moses is telling him is, look, I'm not the man for the job. And so Moses essentially gives him three excuses why he can't do what Father is asking him to do. One is, I don't even know what to tell the people who you are. Who are you? I don't know who you are. And it is here that Father reveals his name to him. He says, I am Yahweh. I am that I am. And this goes back to chapter 3 as well. Number 2, the Hebrews nor the Jews will believe Moses. Moses tells Father, no, okay, so you tell me your name, but when I tell these Hebrews who you are, they're not going to believe me. And then we see that Father tells Moses that he will work wonders through Moses. For it's going to be through Moses that Father will provide a demonstration of his power and authority. A demonstration, a sign. Now, where have we heard about the need for signs? It goes back to the Jewish leaders of Yeshua's day. They said, well, we need to see a sign to show us that you are indeed who you say you are and what authority you have. People want a sign. They need a demonstration. Paul said to the Corinthians that he did not come to them with eloquence of speech, but with a demonstration of the Spirit in power in 2 Corinthians chapter 2:4. And then the third excuse that Moses gives Father is which leads Moses to telling Father that he is not an eloquent speaker. In other words, some translators say that Moses was a stutterer. And Father says, you know what? I'm Jehovah. I am the creator of the universe. I know you're a stutterer. And I've taken that all into account. So you don't need to worry about. In fact, I'm going to give you your brother to help you, who is an eloquent speaker. So I've got that covered too. So Father is telling Moses, I've got all your concerns addressed. You just need to do what I tell you to do. Doesn't that sound like us when Father tells us to do something, we got excuses? But Father has it already. If Father gives you something to do, he has the answers to your concerns and all the impediments already figured out. It becomes our problem then to just carry through with what he's telling us. So Father reveals to Moses his plan to get the Hebrews out of Egyptian bondage. And throughout the remainder of Exodus 4, Moses is then reunited with his brother Aaron, and Moses fills Aaron in and what the plan is, and they travel back to Egypt to bring the news of deliverance to the Hebrews. And Moses then shows his fellow Hebrews, the wonders that Jehovah shows him while at the burning bush, and convinces them that he is who he says he is. Then we go into Exodus 5. And then we see here in Exodus 5, Moses has his first set of confrontations with Pharaoh, and he demands Pharaoh release the Hebrews to go out to the wilderness to worship Yahweh. And so by this time, we're talking a few days here, a few weeks, because what a lot of stories lead us to believe is that Moses and Aaron go back to Egypt, and all the plagues happen, and then the Passover happens, and then we leave, and all this is going to happen within a week or two. Well, the truth be told, this whole story takes months to happen. It's a long time that all of this happens. So this is not just something that happens over a few days. This is quite a bit of time. And Moses goes and he gets the Hebrews, his brethren, to buy into what is going to happen, and the Hebrews stop working. You see, Moses now becomes the Hebrews' leader, and they see him as a leader, and they stop working. And word gets to Pharaoh that the Hebrews have stopped working, and it upsets Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh responds to the work stoppage by doing what? He increases the demands, the labor demands on the Hebrews, and he does not provide them straw to make the brick in order to continue their building projects. And so what Pharaoh is basically doing in doing that is he's overstepping the authority of Moses. So he is saying, look, one way I'm going to squash Moses' influence and authority over the Hebrews is I'm just going to go and override, and I'm going to take away their authority. I'm going to take away Moses' authority. Don't we see sort of that happening today? Where Father has commanded us to meet and convocate on his holy days, but then the government steps in and says, no, you can't meet on those days. You are going to meet when we say you're going to meet. In fact, you're going to stay home. Why is this? Why do men feel they need to do that, to overstep the authority and commandments of Father? They do that in order to diminish the authority of Father, of Yahweh. But Pharaoh thought that he could do that and diminish the authority that Moses had. Then we get into Exodus 6. Moses finds himself between a rock and a hard place. The people aren't listening to him. Pharaoh's not listening to him. You see, the people are upset because now Pharaoh has increased their labor burden. And so Moses is between a rock and a hard place. He goes to Father and complains. And then Father reaffirms the plan for freeing the Hebrews with Moses yet again. Now, what Father reveals to Moses in reaffirming the plan and reaffirming his position as Father's main speaker, the leader, there are 4 themes that I see here. 1, deliverance. Father is going through Moses to provide deliverance. Number 2, Father through Moses is going to provide redemption. Number 3, Father claims Israel for his son, for his firstborn. He is going to claim them above all the peoples on the world as his special possession, his unique people. And 4th, Father will be Israel's God. So he reaffirms with Moses, he gets Moses back on page, and he says, we're going to now enter into the next phase of the plan to free the Hebrews in chapter 7. And before this point, it was reasoning. Father used Moses to reason with his people and reason with Pharaoh. It didn't work. Now he's going into the next phase. And he's going into the next phase now, where he's going to now introduce the wonders, his power and his authority. And how is he going to do it? He starts off slow and low with throwing down the staff before Pharaoh, and it turning into, in what the Hebraic Bible describes, the staff turns into a crocodile. Most translations say that the staff turned into a serpent, and then we end up getting introduced to the magicians, who then respond by throwing their staff down, and it becomes a crocodile or a serpent, and so on and so on. Now, one of the interesting things is that these magicians, Paul brings up to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. And he actually names them as Jannes and Jambres. This is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. Why is this significant? Why is identifying Jannes and Jambres so significant? Well, it goes back, without getting too far off track. Paul had commissioned Timothy to go into Ephesus and take over running and overseeing the churches in Ephesus. And one of the biggest problems that Timothy was having was that the Gnostics, the Gnostic religion, was overrunning the gospel, was overrunning the true faith once delivered. And why is it important? What does Jannes and Jambres have to do with it? Well, the Gnostics believed that Jannes and Jambres were the progenitors. They were the startup. They were the founders of their religion. So we have here an interesting situation in which we have these magicians who were the spokespersons for the gods of Egypt, because a lot of people believe that we believe that Yahweh is the one true God, but then there are other gods, better stated demigods out there. Who are these demigods? They are fallen angels who have set themselves up as gods over the nation peoples of the world. And the Egyptians adopt these gods, these demigods, and so over time now, Father is now going to cast judgment upon these demigods of Egypt. So getting back to our story in Exodus 7, so ultimately what happens is Moses' staff, which turned into the crocodile or the serpent, ends up eating up the serpent or the crocodile that Jannes and Jambres put forth before Pharaoh. And there were some other demonstrations of power before Pharaoh, and it kind of fell on deaf ears. So Father says, okay, the gloves are off. We're going to now get down. We're going to have a little fight here. So now we get into the 10 plagues of Egypt. And all these 10 plagues are ultimately going to lead to the Passover story, the whole introduction of Passover. And it's a fascinating story. And the 10 plagues, we could spend hours talking about the significance, the spiritual significance of the plagues. But we know that a couple things are specific to the plagues. The plagues that Father puts forth against Egypt were for various purposes and to put forth specific points that Father wanted to make Egypt recognize. One, I just mentioned earlier, he was going to pass judgment against the gods of Egypt. He was going to also pass judgment against the people of Egypt. Remember, the Egyptians have blood on their hands because they killed many, many male children, many, many male sons of the Hebrews. And you know what? Father looked upon Israel as his son. So Pharaoh was executing his son. And in the end, Father is going to execute the sons of Egypt. In response, Father, through these plagues, is going to attack the might of Egypt, the authority of Pharaoh. Father would show the world then. This was the ultimate point, though, in all the plagues. All these other things are wonderful. The judgment against the gods of Egypt, judgment against the people of Egypt, the might of Egypt. But most important, Father would show the world. Remember, Egypt was the superpower. Egypt was the United States of the known world at that time. Everybody went to Egypt. Egypt was the breadbasket. Egypt of the world at that time. Egypt was the knowledge base. All the knowledge, all the man-known knowledge was found in Egypt. So everybody in the world of that time knew about Egypt. So Father is going to now show Egypt who is God. And you know what? In the end, it's all about Father getting the glory. And whether Pharaoh gives in to the demands to let Father's people go or not, it's going to be Father's way or it's going to be Father's way. And Father is ultimately going to get the glory. So let's go through. Now, this whole set of 10 plagues is found between Exodus chapter 7, verse 15, and it goes all the way up through Exodus chapter 11, verse 10. Not going to read all of that because we're limited on time, but we'll just go through them really quickly. So the 10 plagues, one of the things I want to say before we go real quick through the 10 plagues is that during Passover, the Jews commemorate the 10 plagues through their Passover seders. Now, I'm not a big fan of seders because a lot of it is kind of pagan derived, a lot of the way the plate is set up and what it all means and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, if people choose to do seders, that's between them and Father. But the whole point behind Passover for the Jews has become a rehearsal or a recitation or a reciting of the 10 plagues. And they do that in the middle of their service. So when you hear about Passover seders, this is the main thing in which they talk about of these 10 plagues. So let's go through the 10 plagues. The first plague was the plague of blood. Father has Moses, or actually Aaron, touch the Nile River with the staff of Moses, and the Nile River turns into blood. What was this all about? Well, the Nile River was seen as deity. It was this plague, the first plague, was a direct attack against the god of the Nile. The Nile was seen as because the Nile was where all life kind of flowed in Egypt. And it was a big deal. They worshiped the Nile. So what is the first thing that Father does? He attacks one of the epicenters of Egyptian worship. So we see here the first attack is blood. It drives and freaks all the Egyptians out because the thing that every Egyptian kind of revered was messed up. It was blood. What happens when you got blood in the water? The fish die. Life around the whole Nile is really messed up, and you can't use the water. And no doubt it smelled. The second one, frogs. This again was an attack against the Egyptian deity because the Egyptians worshiped frogs. One of their main deities was a god, and we're told not to even say the names of the gods, so I'm not going to repeat the names, but it was an Egyptian goddess of fertility. And this was an attack. So what happens? Frogs proliferate the land and overrun the land of Egypt. So we have the second one. And again, they all come and emerge out of the Nile River. So we've got two attacks against the gods of Egypt. Father is showing that he is the creator of the universe. These other demigods, your Nile and the frogs, I control them. I am in charge. Next is the plague of lice or gnats. Now Father is transitioning from an attack or a pronouncement against the gods of Egypt, and he's going directly towards or against the people's well-being. So he sends lice or gnats. What is that about? Well, the issue is that these gnats and lice were biting the people. They were causing them harm. They were causing them discomfort. So it was an annoyance. That was the number 3. Then the fourth is flies. Again, flies are a nuisance. And this was directed against the people's well-being. In addition, believe it or not, the Egyptians also revered or worshiped flies. In fact, when an Egyptian soldier became renowned, when he did a great feat, they would be awarded a golden fly that they would wear in an amulet around their neck. So again, another slight attack or pronouncement against the gods of Egypt, as well as a nuisance. Flies are a nuisance. Then we get into the number 5, the livestock die. Now, this is an interesting one. This plague of the livestock dying is interesting. Here we see an extension of Father's grace. What am I talking about? Father's grace in the death of all the Egyptian livestock? Well, Father gave the Egyptians notice through Moses, get your livestock indoors because your livestock is going to die if it's left out in the field. So he extends his grace out to the Egyptians, and it's up to the Egyptians now who have been through 4 plagues: blood, frogs, lice, flies. Now he is saying, okay, you've been through this. You know who I am. You know, this is Father speaking. You know who I am and what I'm capable of. Now I'm going to extend to you grace. Get your cattle in, because I'm going to also show you an amazing thing. What ends up happening is that the Egyptians' livestock, any caught in the field dies, but the livestock of the Israelis or the Hebrews are left all well and good. That is an impossible feat unless you're Yahweh. So we see that happen, but what ends up happening is that some of the Egyptians heed the warning and they get their livestock because they just went through the flies, the lice, the frogs, and the blood. So they go, I'm going to listen and get my livestock, my cows, all my stuff into shelter. And those who did not heed left their stuff outside. And they ended up losing their livestock. And that devastates the meat economy of Egypt. So Father is systematically picking apart the fabric of Egypt through these 10 plagues. Bit by bit, the gods, the religious system, the well-being, the health of the people. He's picking apart. The next thing, number 6, is boils are directed against the well-being of the people. The Egyptians break out into these boils or these pustulates that when they open, they cause a form of leprosy upon the people. And boils are extremely painful. I mean, some of us have had the experience of having boils, and if you do, it's extremely painful. You can't do anything. You can't work. You can't move around. You are in misery. So now Father is attacking the health of the people. Then number 7 takes us into another aspect of Father picking away at Egypt. Now he's going into the elements. Now we're going to have the plague of hail. Hail falls down from heaven. And what is the whole point behind this? Well, we know that it kind of takes us into this whole aspect of this time of the month. We know that we have been told to guard the month of the Aviv. What does that mean? Well, we know that Passover falls within the month of Aviv. And the month of Aviv is the very first month of Father's calendar year. When we're talking about Aviv, we're talking about the maturity of the barley harvest, the barley crop. When the barley is at its ripest, it is brittle and it will break easily. But we find out in this plague that the barley was in an Aviv state, but the wheat and the spelt were immature. They were still maturing. When a plant is immature, it's very pliable. It doesn't break very easy. It's very green and it kind of goes with the wind and everything. Well, Father sends the hail down. And what does it do? It devastates the barley harvest. That was, remember, Egypt was the breadbasket of the entire known world. And he devastates in one plague the barley harvest. Takes it out. But he spares, his grace, he spares the wheat harvest. So it's very interesting to see how he pulls that out. So Father asserts himself as God over the elements. He determined, I am sending hail, and it's going to take out your entire barley harvest. Number 8, he sends locusts. A wind from the east brings locusts to finish off the barley that the hail didn't destroy. Again, he is an amazing God. He even controls the locusts and the timing of the locusts coming in. And the 9th plague, darkness, which was described as a darkness so thick that people could not see one another. In fact, it was, according to Exodus 10, verse 21 and 23, the darkness could be felt. And when you have perpetual night, nothing grows. Everything stops because people can't work. People can't do anything because of the darkness. So he brings Egypt to a full stop, which is interesting. Because now, throughout all of these plagues, Pharaoh gives in because of the plague, and then he pulls back. He gives in, and he pulls back. Okay, I'll let you go. I'll let you go and worship your God. But then he throws these caveats in. But leave your cattle, leave your children. But you can go. But Father is a God of, I want it all, or I don't want any of it at all. I'm going to have it my way, or I'm going to have it my way. And so what ends up happening is that Pharaoh, according to the Bible, his heart is hardened after each successive plague. His heart is hardened more and more and more. And the thing is that apart from all these plagues devastating all of Egypt, every aspect of Egyptians' existence, Father is playing on Pharaoh's entire being, and he is showing him how the Egyptian people would urge Pharaoh to let the people go, to stop this. But then when it all comes down and Pharaoh relents and says, okay, I'll let you go, Father knows the heart. You see, Father searches the heart. He is a God of the heart. And he knew Pharaoh, when he would give in, his heart wasn't right. So he knew that there's a difference between heeding what somebody says, heeding a warning, and there's a difference between, what is the word I want to use? There's a difference between listening to what somebody says and heeding what someone says. Because when you listen to somebody saying, you just go through the motion, you're just going through the motions of doing it just to get them off your back, but your heart's not in it. And Pharaoh's heart was never in it. Most of the Egyptians' hearts were never in. They just wanted to get this naggingness stuff with these plagues off their back. So Father was constantly testing the Egyptians, but his grace was being extended to them. And over time, Father's plan was coming to its fullest. And we get to the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn, which leads to the beginning of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So I would ask if somebody can read Exodus 12, verses 1 through 36. We're going to stop really quick between some of the sections. And this is the last section of what I'm going to talk about. But I think in order to understand the Passover, which is outlined in Exodus 12, I want us to kind of read through quickly verses 1 through 36. Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And Yahweh, Yahuwah, spoke unto El Moshe and El Aharon in the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So we have here in verses 1 through 2 that you just read, we have Father establishing his calendar. Why is Father putting his calendar? He's saying this is going to be the start of your calendar year. From this day forward, we're starting everything new. Why was that important? Because the world that the Hebrews were in were following the Egyptians' calendar. So Father is saying, look, you're going to be my people. You're going to follow my way. So we're going to start here with the calendar. You're going to start following my reckoning of time. You're going to ignore the Egyptian calendar. So Father here in verses 1 and 2 establishes his reckoning of time, which always was in existence, but he's now reintroducing it to the Hebrews. Okay, go on to verses 3 through 5. Exodus chapter 12, verses 3 through 5, and it reads, speak ye unto all the assembly of Yisrael, saying, in the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. So here we see in verses 3 through 5, the Hebrews are required on the 10th day. Now, when this was first being put out, it was the first day of the month of Aviv. You know what the cool thing is? That right now, this year in 2020, we are basically following the biblical calendar is laid out the exact same way that it was in the year that our master was crucified. But that's just an aside. I'm really into the calendar, so that's something I won't burden you with right now. But anyway, right now, we were up to day 10 of the month of the Aviv. And on day 10 of the first month, Father tells the Hebrews, you're going to select an unblemished male lamb of the first year. And you're going to take this lamb into your home. And it's going to be a lamb for a family. And this is going to be kept in your home beginning on the 10th day. Okay? Next, read verses 6 and 7. Exodus 12, verses 6 and 7. And it reads, "And ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole multitude of the assembly of Yisrael shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorpost of the houses, wherein they shall eat it." So now, 4 days later, Father is telling the Hebrews that they are to take that lamb that they selected 4 days prior, and they are to slaughter it at twilight. And some of the blood of that lamb was to be smeared upon the doorpost and the lintels of each Hebrew's home. Now, there is a tremendous amount here that a lot of people don't ever really get to understand or talking about. And I mentioned at the start of what I was talking about, covenants, blood covenants. In the ancient Near East, the blood on the doorpost and on the lintels, this was not new. This was something that was practiced, and in some places in the Near East, it is still practiced to this day. You have to understand that in some parts, the ancient Near East thinking, in particular now the Hebrews, the most important part of the home is the front door. And why is the front door the most important thing out there? The most important part of the home being the front door is because the front door is where all kinds of transactions occur. In fact, the front door was the place that determined whether you come in or you don't come into the home. And the blood symbolizes covenant. You see, Father requires blood as atonement, and he seals his agreement with blood. You can go back and read the Abraham story. And throughout the Bible, Father has chosen the element of blood to cement his covenant with his people. So why did he choose blood? Well, because he's God and he can do it, but also he stated to us that life is in the blood. And we know that all of this is pointing to Yeshua, but also we have to understand, going back to this custom of putting blood on the doorpost, what it symbolized in the ancient Near East is when you cross the threshold of our home, you are in covenant with the members of this home and in agreement in covenant with that person, that family's God. And so the blood represented a blood covenant with that family, that they are under the protection and the oversight of that God. And specifically here, by the act of putting the blood on the doorpost, the most important aspect of the home, which marriages were performed at the doors, business transactions were conducted at the doors of ancient Near East homes. Now, Father is saying this most important element of the home, we are in agreement that I am going to be your God, I'm going to be your protector, and no harm is going to be coming over you because you're protected by the blood. And that's what we're all about here with our Master's blood. He is the Passover lamb, and he is the one whose blood is shed so that we are protected. We are protected from eternal death. He has instituted a renewed covenant whereby we are now protected by Yahweh, the creator of the universe, and no harm should come against us. And so when we're looking at this COVID-19 or this coronavirus, we always must be mindful that our homes should be protected. And thus, we are under Father's protection. So we have this whole thing of the blood being smeared on the doorpost. Okay, now verses 8 through 11, please. Exodus chapter 12, verses 8 through 11. And it reads, "And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and matzah, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remains of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh, Jehovah's Pesach." So here we see the institution of the Passover meal, which consists of roasted lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and the meal was to be eaten in haste, and the participants of that meal were to be dressed to leave their homes at a moment's notice. So Father has instituted now a new commandment, this very first feast of the biblical calendar year that we are to keep in perpetuity. Okay, so next let's go ahead and read verses 12 through 14. Exodus chapter 12, verses 12 through 14, and it reads, "For I will pass through the land of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both man and beast. And against all the Elohim of Mitzrayim I will execute judgment. I am Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahuwah. And the blood shall be to you for a mark upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Mitzrayim. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." Okay, in these three verses, Father reveals his plan again, that he is reaping judgment upon the gods, the demigods of Egypt. And now the whole thing of the death of the firstborn of Egypt is brought out. That we know that, again, Father saw the Israelites, the Hebrews, as his firstborn, as his children. And now judgment is being passed, and Father is now going to kill the firstborn of Egypt. So blood was to be a sign that Father would pass over the homes that had the blood on the doorpost and lintels, and no harm would befall the members of that home. Passover, the passing over of the home, such that death is not allowed to touch the members of that home. Yeshua is our Passover. Thus, because of his work and his shed blood, eternal death does not harm us. Okay, how about verses 15 through 20? A few verses now. 15 through 20. We're getting near the end. Exodus chapter 12, verses 15 through 20. 7 days shall ye eat matzah. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eats chamat, or leaven, from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Yisrael. And in the first day there shall be a holy assembly, a mikra, a convocation. And in the 7th day there shall be a holy assembly to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall guard the feast of Matzah. For in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Mitzrayim. Therefore shall ye guard this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month of the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat matzah until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days shall there be no chemat or leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eats that which is with chemats, even that soul shall be cut off from the assembly of Yisrael, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing with chemats or leaven. In all your habitations shall ye eat matzah. So now we've been given prior verses. We were given the institution and understanding of Passover. Then we go into unleavened bread, in which Father says that for 7 days we are to eat unleavened bread, as well as we should not have any leaven in our homes. So those of us who are Torah observant have been in the process over the last few days of expunging, getting rid of all the leaven from our homes, and preparing to have unleavened bread, which we call matzah. And so for 7 days, we're going to consume matzah. It's not the only thing we're going to eat, but we're going to at least have a portion of matzah each of those 7 days. So we'll continue and finish off this section with verses 21 through 36. Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 through 36. And the Sefer translation reads as follows. Then Moshe called for all the elders of Yisrael and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families, and kill the Pesach. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at that of the door. You shall not go out. None of you shall go out at the door of your house until the morning. For Yahweh Yahuwah will pass through to smite the Mitzrayim, or the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood upon the lintel and on the 2 side posts, Yahweh Yahuwah will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And ye shall guard this thing for an ordinance to you and to your sons forever. And it shall come to pass when ye are come to the land which Yahweh Yahuwah will give you, according as he has promised, that ye shall guard this service. And it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of Yahweh Yahuwah's Pesach, who passed over the houses of the children of Yisrael in Mitzrayim, when he smote the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Yisrael went away and did as Yahweh Yahuwah had commanded. Moshe and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass that at midnight Yahuwah smote all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Mitzrayim. And there was a great cry in Mitzrayim, and there was a great cry, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moshe and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel. And go serve Jehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone. And bless me also, by the way. Verse 32. Now we're in verse 33. And the Mitzrayim were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste. For they said, we be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moshe. And they borrowed of the Mitzrayim jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And lastly, verse 36. And Jehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, gave the people favor in the sight of the Mitzrayim, of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Mitzrayim. So, bringing this to a close, the Hebrews then end up doing what they were instructed in all the previous verses of this chapter 12, and Yahweh as he promises, he goes through the land of Egypt and all the firstborn are killed. And Pharaoh then in response summons Moses and tells him, get out of here yesterday. Go, take everything. I don't even want a remnant of you left in Egypt. So get out of here, take everything. So the Hebrews leave out in haste, just as they were ready to go the night before. That present evening, this is early morning, they're told, you get out of here. So they are ready to go. Remember, they had their staff and their clothes on. They were good to go. But the interesting thing is, Father had made favor with the Israelites. Even in the midst of these 10 plagues, the Hebrews had favor with the Egyptians. And because of that, the Hebrews left with the wealth of Egypt in tow. They had it on their possessions. That's how they were able to build the elements of the tent of meeting. That's how they were able to build the Ark of the Covenant and all these things, as well as have material wealth, because Father in his infinite wisdom saw that they would need these things in their journey ahead. And so that favor was the thing that kept Israel and would keep them on their journey ahead. So I want to thank you all for this overview of the Passover, and I will turn it over to Pastor Hall at this point.
Well, I hope, trust, and pray you got something out of that overview of the first Passover, which was encapsulated, or it is recorded in Exodus 1 all the way through Exodus 12. And we are praying and trusting that you will have a blessed Passover season that's coming up this weekend. It's going to be tough for many of us because we can't really have the gatherings that we're used to having, but Father is still on the throne and he's in charge. So again, remember, we're doing QFC Live for every single day of the feast coming up here, beginning with our first into it's going to be our second installment of QFC Live. We did one this past Friday night. We're going to be doing one this coming Tuesday night. So we encourage you to join us, and we will be going all the way through, believe it or not, we're going to be going all the way through from Passover all the way through the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. So join us, and we pray that you and your families will be well and blessed during this time. Shalom, take care, until next time. This is Rod signing out.